On Tech News Today, Comcast gets bigger, Apple gets cleaner, and Motorola chief Dennis Woodside gets a new job. All that and more coming up next.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's Thursday, February 13th, 2014, and this is Tech News Today. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used iPhone, iPad, and other Apple products are worth at Gazelle.com. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgin.
And I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the most important stories of the day in conversation with the world's leading journalists. Speaking of leading journalists, our guest today is Lance Ulanoff, Chief Correspondent, Editor-at-Large at Mashable. How's it going, Lance?
Good, good. How are you guys?
Great. So what have you been up to? I know you're in New York. How are you enjoying that snow?
This is what I've been up to,
yes.
Shoveling.
Up to your knees.
Company health plan.
It's an incredible storm going on the whole eastern seaboard, up and down the coast. And actually, interestingly enough, not only am I physically dealing with the storm, but Mashable's been covering it. We just hired a climate reporter, Andrew Friedman, who's doing a killer job, really giving us great insight into how these things work and how it's impacting people. So that's been a lot of fun. And, it kind of gives me a different perspective on the weather.
I bet. You should volunteer to do a hands-on review of that remote control snowplow that I saw online.
Yes, please, because my wife thinks I'm a remote control snowplow.
Yes, I got news for you, pal. You are. Well, let's get to the news. Comcast intends to buy Time Warner Cable. The number one provider is buying the number two. Buying the second largest U.S. cable TV company would add more than 11 million residential subscribers to Comcast's reach. It would also bring Comcast into the New York City market and give the company more leverage with content providers. With us to talk about all this is Brian Bishop, who writes for The Verge. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on the show.
So can you tell us a bit more about this deal?
Yeah, definitely. Is basically, there's been lots of back and forth trying to figure out, who is going to get Time Warner. Charter had been going after them. There was talks really early on that Comcast and Charter were going to partner to get Time Warner. But basically, the deal is about $45 billion. And, there's going to be a lot of regulatory approvals before this thing actually happens, which is going to be a big part of the story, I think, over the next year. But as you said, it has a chance to kind of go and bring Comcast into different media markets where it hasn't been before and kind of have a real nationwide reach, which has a lot of implications just in terms of, for consumers and, what it can do for itself long term and becoming this, this bigger company becoming even a bigger giant company.
Now, I understand that they're divesting themselves of some customers so that they don't freak out the regulators. Basically, they want to keep it to around 1/3 of the U.S. market so that this has a better chance of being approved. Is that correct?
Right. They're talking about divesting themselves of 3 million subscribers, so their TV market share would be just around or under 30%.
I wonder if that's like just a churn rate for them. Divesting this makes it sound like they're actually going to take some action when it's probably just people leaving. People constantly, try and if they have like a second option in the market, they switch all the time. Brian, I did have a question though. There was that report that Apple had just been talking to Time Warner. Right. About getting the Time Warner on Apple TV. It seems like, and maybe we're wrong about this, that this could throw a wrench in the works there, that if there was a deal there, that could be done.
Well, it's interesting. Like Time Warner, they were kind of, that seems to me that they were trying to respond to outside pressures. There have been all the takeover talk. There have been talk earlier this week about how they're going to pump up the quality of their internet service. With this kind of move, that kind of deal kind of could be put on the table. But there's actually a weird upside to this in that, Comcast being able to go and, being this nationwide company could conceivably cut a deal for some sort of, integrated TV service with an Apple TV or an Xbox One. And, we've seen a lot of companies trying to make these products work in the marketplace, and they haven't worked because it's all been piecemeal, because you can't introduce some sort of game-changing feature and have it work, on Comcast in one area and not in Charter or not in, Time Warner somewhere else. If they were of the mindset, they could go and basically cut a deal and have that kind of thing, have it work as a product across the United States and it could open the door for some really kind of cool products. The question is the new Comcast going to be motivated to do that?
In Apple's perfect world, there's one cable company.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. Brian, you wrote a piece published today called "Why You Should Be Scared of Comcast and Time Warner Cable Merging." So why should we be scared?
Well, it's a lot of people that already have cable service know what kind of an ugly scenario it is. There's basically, regional monopolies where, because of infrastructure needs, you only have one company. You only have Time Warner available, or you only have Comcast available. And other companies like DirecTV, Dish, or even Verizon Fios offer some alternatives, but there's not kind of an all-in-one solution. So that's kind of locked in. People haven't been able to go and choose different options. There's always the great hope that someday maybe magically competition can happen. This would kind of, put the kibosh on that. Not actual that there's a competition actually happening, but it would, squelch the hope of competition in cable emerging. So that's not great news. There's also net neutrality concerns, in terms of, throttling and that kind of thing. Comcast, it's all kind of a black magic, but Comcast is relatively slow when it comes to Netflix's speed rankings and things of that nature. There's also been issues, with its data caps applying against other companies, but not its own video apps. So those are all concerns, and also just straight things like customer service, issues that should be addressed with regular marketplace competition aren't because of this, regional, cable monopoly. So that's just going to, be in place. It's going to get solidified and become permanent when it comes just to cable.
Now, a lot of the articles about this have emphasized the fact that they're shooting for about 30% of the market in terms of TV subscribers. But these two combined companies will control about half of what is called triple play services, which is when you get a single package of video, voice, and internet. Half in the U.S. And Malik says that this is really about broadband, not television. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think broadband is basically the future of all the things we're talking about here. It's TV has been doing well, but last year, both DirecTV and Comcast had net loss for TV subscribers, while broadband usage, broadband subscribers were ticking up. Services are moving in that direction. Whether it's going to be over the top, whether it's going to be something like Intel tried to do and failed. Internet is going to be the new delivery mechanism. The question is, how are these companies going to go and, control that, and when are they going to jump on board? This deal basically gives Comcast the ability to go and control the entire widget, from content creation with the studios and networks to, distribution into your home via the TV or the internet. And it puts them in a huge position of power that not a lot of other companies can go and face off against. They're kind of like on their own, out there at the front at this point, if this goes through.
Speaking of power, I guess this also means that when the cable companies get into these negotiations with networks and some of the cable networks for carriage, that it really changes the face of those negotiations. There's so much more leverage now on the Comcast Time Warner side. I think I may be wrong, but aren't no, it's DirecTV and the Weather Channel still fighting. But when these fights start, they're protracted, but I have a feeling that, when you've got somebody controlling so much of the market, that it is going to change things.
Yeah, and you've already seen, Comcast getting really kind of gutsy when it comes to things like Aereo, kind of, services that basically, stream broadcast television over the air. They've kind of signaled that they might, have some support towards companies like that, because that's, for them, that could be a benefit to not have to pay some of those fees. So they're definitely emboldened, and this kind of feels like it's only going to take that a step further.
Something like 3/4 of the U.S. Of the potential subscribers in the United States have access to only 2 providers, according to the FCC. It seems like this kind of deal is going in the wrong direction. How can the U.S. ever get to the point where the average subscriber has, the kind of choice you find in places like the UK, which drives up the, broadband speeds, drives down costs? It seems like we're going toward kind of monopoly as opposed to away from it.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, I think there already is a de facto monopoly, which isn't great. That's a terrible situation. But I don't know a lot of people that sit around and say like, oh, in my house I can choose between, Comcast and Time Warner, both. A lot of people already don't have that option, which, that's the sad state of affairs that we're already at. That's the problem. Will this make that worse? Arguably. But it's not as if there was, great competition that this will be actively squelching as much as it will be kind of, cementing what's already been going on. But regulatory approval is a big question mark, and also what can the FCC do to kind of, create more competition, especially when the question of net neutrality is concerned. Like, net neutrality is one of those overarching things that, depending how quickly television distribution moves to online as its primary medium, can really go and affect everything in terms of, who has control of what and what stations get precedence. It can, shape the control of whether somebody like Netflix can become a full-fledged TV station, or if it's going to be stuck with this, current paradigm we have and with the same licensing fees just distributed online.
Well, it's all very interesting, and it'll be interesting to follow this over the next year to see if this thing gets approved. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Cool. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Have a great one.
Thanks. You can find Brian Bishop on Twitter at BCBishop. Now, in just a second, we're going to tell you about Apple's new report cracking down on conflict minerals. But first, I want to tell you about Gazelle. Gazelle is a company that will buy your used iPhone or iPad or a gadget. All you do is you go to Gazelle.com. That's GAZELLE.com. You find the item that you have sitting around in a box or a drawer in the garage that's gathering dust. You plug it in there, and Gazelle will tell you how much money they'll give you for it. It's a fantastic deal because those gadgets you have lying around, yesterday's new hotness and today's old and busted, you can get real money for this, and that can fund your next purchase if you like, and you can upgrade earlier and more often than you otherwise could. Gazelle makes selling your used gadgets fast and simple. Just tell Gazelle the condition that sometimes even buy broken iPhones and iPads, and you can get a risk-free offer for your gadgets. They'll lock in the price that they quote you for 30 days. That means you can get your quote now, and then you can send it in weeks later. They'll pay you in cash by check, PayPal, or if you use an Amazon gift card, they'll pay you 5% more than you'll otherwise get. Now, many items even qualify for a free box, so they'll send you the box and you just send it in. Super, super easy to do. Gazelle has paid more than $100 million to over 700,000 customers. So find out what your iPhone is worth. Take a minute and go to Gazelle.com to find out. Do it now because your iPhone may lose value the longer you wait. Well, Apple says they're cracking down on conflict minerals. With us to explain what Apple's up to is Tim Bradshaw, the San Francisco correspondent for the Financial Times. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Thanks for having me on.
So what are conflict minerals exactly?
So conflict minerals is a broad term to describe, in principle, 4 key minerals, which are tantalum, tin, tungsten, and gold, which go into making a lot of the very tiny electronic components that go into all of our electronic devices, whether that's TVs or mobile phones or laptops or whatever it is. And it's a lot of the materials that come from regions such as Democratic Republic of Congo and neighboring areas that are in a state of conflict at the moment, and in many cases warlords control those mines, and the conditions that people work in there are pretty abysmal. There was a documentary film that came out a couple of years ago called Blood in the Mobile, which looked into Nokia's supply chain and actually went right down into one of those mines and saw children clawing at the walls. It's pretty horrific stuff, but it's worth seeing because I think this is in many of the devices that we use. And so what Apple is trying to do is bring more transparency to its supply chain in much the same way as it went through with manufacturers like Foxconn to talk about labor rights in factories in China after had a spate of suicides there, and there are still some isolated cases of underage labour that it's finding there, but it's now trying to go even further back into the supply chain, and as Tim Cook put it last year, right down into the mines. And so it has listed all of its known smelters, which are the sort of choke points through which all of this material goes, and saying which of them are compliant with ethical guidelines, the conflict-free smelting initiative, and saying which are compliant with that, which are robust ethical human rights standards, and which they do not know about the ethical standards. And it's a bit of an attempt to name and shame those that are not complying with those, as well as ensuring that more legitimate operators do get more demand from not just Apple but the rest of the technology supply chain.
So are you impressed with Apple's initiative here? Are they a leader or a follower in this regard?
conflict minerals has been a problem for a very long time, and so I think in some ways it's taken the entire industry quite a long time to try and get to grips with that. But that's partly just because this stuff is so difficult to track. People, pull bags of materials out of the mine and throw them into the back of a truck, and then they go unlabeled to the smelter where they get processed, and then sort of go off to another part of the supply chain all around the world. And it's quite difficult to really track it back. Intel at CES last month announced that it was making the first completely conflict-free microprocessors, and it was ensuring that all 4 of those minerals were sourced from good places. Apple so far is saying only that its tantalum is definitely conflict-free, and it's working on the other 3. Apple has kind of said that it's starting with tantalum because tantalum is one of those materials that's mainly used by the electronics supply chain. About 50% of all the world's tantalum goes into phones and other gadgets. Gold obviously is used for many more things. So the industry has less leverage there to kind of apply this sort of ethical pressure. So it's great that they're trying to shine a light into these rather dark places, and it's a good step in the right direction, but they're not the first, and they're certainly not the only, and it's not the sort of problem that can be solved by one company alone, even a company as big as Apple.
I'm curious about how they actually police this. I mean, I sat in the CES keynote where the Intel CEO Brian Kuzanich made this statement, and he said 100% conflict-free in this calendar year. And it was a really strong statement. Visually, it had high impact, and everybody can agree this is a good idea. But what do they do? How do they know? And secondarily, what do they replace it with if they're not using the materials that come from these countries where those resources are greatest?
There's a few things. I mean, they haven't gone into huge amounts of detail about how they are doing it. There's kind of methods like bag and tag, which is trying to put tracking tags on the bags as they come out of the mines in order to kind of track those sources. And then if you don't have that kind of tracking, that obviously is potentially a red flag. And this is all kind of done by third-party auditing organizations. There's the Conflict-Free Sourcing Initiative. There's the Electronics Industry Citizenship Coalition. There's a whole list of about a dozen different third-party and independent groups that they're working with, some of which are funded by the electronics industry and some of which are independent non-profits. They're actually publishing this supply list, the smelter list rather, every quarter. So I spoke to Jeff Williams, who's Apple's SVP of operations yesterday, and he was very much aware that this is a moving target and you can't really say job done. And so they're trying to put this out every quarter. They're conscious that it's a very difficult challenge to keep on top of. And I think it's also worth kind of talking about the language that people use on this. I mean, in Apple's report, they say that for January 2014, they confirmed that all active identified tantalum smelters in the supply chain were validated as conflict-free. So these are the ones they know about. It may be that there are other smelters in the supply chain that their suppliers or their suppliers are not telling them about. And it just when you have a supply chain as big as Apple's to deliver 50 million iPhones in a quarter, this can be a very, very steep learning curve, and it's not something that I've seen anyone try before. So I think absolutely we should not take them at their word that this is something that is permanently fixed, but I think it's admirable that they're at least trying.
I know what gold, tin, and tungsten is, but what is tantalum and what do they use it for in phones?
It goes into resistors and capacitors, so it's very small components. I'm afraid my knowledge of rare earth minerals is not a lot further than that one, but it's this is stuff that's kind of the fundamental building blocks of our everyday devices. So it's everywhere.
Okay, and it's an incredibly interesting report coming out of Apple, and I really liked your report and your interview in the Financial Times, and I thank you so much. But before I let you go, I want to ask you how the heck you got the Twitter name Tim. What were you, an employee at Twitter?
No, I just got very lucky very early. I joined in December 2006, so it was before most people joined up. I think following South by Southwest in 2007 was when Twitter really kind of exploded. So I got on there a bit early. I think I saw a blog post by On Malik, who's already been referenced today, godfather of tech blogging and all the tech. He was talking about it, and I kind of signed up. And my first tweets are not very profound. I've kind of gone through different iterations of my usage of it, just like Twitter has. I thought it, I got lucky. But it's great because it means I get a lot of other Tim's tweets. People that don't realize that if you put a space between Tim and the surname, that so I get Tim Cook's tweets, for instance, about Apple's share price, which is occasionally interesting.
Well, early mover advantage, I guess. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tim.
Thanks for having me on.
You can find Tim's work at ft.com, and also you can find him on Twitter at Tim. Well, Dropbox hired Motorola chief Dennis Woodside to be the company's new chief operating officer. Jonathan Rosenberg, the head of the product management at Google, will become Motorola's new CEO. Lance, what do you think about this? Is this a good move for Dropbox?
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely have somebody with that skill set. I mean, I kind of feel like this guy has really landed on his feet to go from something that you know, didn't go as well as Google expected, and to walk into, you know, here's the thing about cloud, you know, clouding and cloud services. They're incredibly important. It's a growing market. You know, one of the things that I said about this year that I really expect is for these companies to get more commercial and more competitive. I know that part of his job is to really sort of, you know, drive this stuff into businesses, and businesses are really, you know, they're not buying local storage anymore, certainly not as much. They're trying to have their content, their files and the things that everybody needs up in the cloud. So it's a massive market, but I also think that, you know, it's basically the same way a lot of other technologies work. If you are comfortable with a service like Dropbox at home, you are going to be interested in having access to it in the office. So, you know, they want that education to really spread out, and they want people to feel comfortable and that these tools are effective enough for them to use on a daily basis. So it's a great move for him, and you know, to have, you know, to be with it, and it's a great move for them to have somebody with his expertise at running something really quite big and really close to sort of consumers, I'd say.
It feels to me like this is part of an effort to prepare for an IPO. Do you have any predictions on when Dropbox will do an IPO?
Yes, in 2014. I mean, I think actually, you know, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and they've done this at the beginning of the calendar year. I mean, it's kind of lucky. I'm sure they were looking, and he became available, and they moved fast, and he can get the company into a good position for that. They'll want to have it happen before the end of this year, but it won't happen in a couple of months. It could happen in 6 or 7 months, depending on what he sees when he comes in. If he thinks that they're ready, if he thinks that the story that Dropbox wants to tell is consistent and smart enough for the investment community to make it a successful IPO. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of things he's going to look at there before they go that way. And I don't have any, I should have prefaced this by saying, I really don't know. They could not go public this year for any number of reasons, but it seems like, I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like companies are becoming a lot more public. Tech companies are becoming a lot more comfortable going public again.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I do think they're going to go public this year, possibly sooner rather than later in the year. So we'll be looking for that. And it sounds like a smart move by what is always a smart company. Dropbox is a very, very smart company. So looking forward to see what they do next. Well, estimates this week show that Apple and Samsung, guess what? They continue to dominate the handset industry, especially in the area of profits. Pretty much Apple and Samsung are making all the profits in the handset business. But today, the world's #3 smartphone maker, LG, unveiled a superphone designed to put the company into the running. It's called the G Pro 2. It's got a lot of high-end features, but the camera and screen features are really interesting. What do you think about this phone, Lance?
Oh my God, it's so big.
It's ginormous.
It's a fat.
Yeah.
It's a super high-powered phone. It's got that 4K video. It's got slow-mo video. It's got everything. By the way, it's not in the U.S. market yet. They're in Korea. Which makes sense. You know, if you ever go to South Korea, the two big companies there that seem to own the place are Samsung and LG. They're like the parents of that place, so they're always battling it out. So it makes sense for them to go there first. You know, I have to say that I feel like I was wrong about what the size of the phones that people would actually accept. I never thought people would really get into these big phones, but they are doing well. But the problem for LG is that they have trouble dragging away mind share from Samsung, especially in the US, where you just talked about who really is making the money here. I mean, Samsung has really made hay with the Galaxy S series, and they're kind of on this juggernaut now, right? We've had the 3, we had the 4. 3 has been the super hit, 4 has been a little bit of a slow climber, and now 5 is around the corner. So LG almost seems to be moving slowly, and for whatever reason, doesn't create the same phenomenon. Is this the phone to do it? Probably not, because I think they've gone too big. I actually think that this is a size where it gets too large, just my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think, Jason? Is this an awesome phone? Are you going to run out and buy this immediately?
It has some interesting features. It's too bad that you can't do 4K and 120 frames per second at the same time.
Yeah.
It's one or the other, to be noted. But that, I mean, that's a small quibble. It's still got 4K video, so that's pretty neat. It has the controls on the back, which I never really cared much for, but some people really do like that. I think what you're talking about, Lance, and I completely agree, is that when you're talking about Samsung and Apple, what they have that LG does not right now is they have just an insane success with marketing their products and really getting out there and making sure that people know what Samsung devices are and what Apple products are. You don't see that kind of push with LG. And when LG is ready, unfortunately, to step up to the plate and put down as much money as Samsung and Apple are already doing with their devices to really make sure that people see it in marketing on TV, movies, whatever, they're probably always going to be, in the back end, 3, 4, 5th smartphone device maker. That's probably always going to be the case until they pony up more.
Yeah. One other cool thing about this, I kind of like it. It's a design show-offy kind of a thing, is that it has a 3.3 millimeter bezel. That's a very paper-thin bezel. And I like that direction in phones. I really like the, hope we get to the point where it's just screen from edge to edge. And that would just be a really nice way to maximize screen real estate and minimize the size of the physical hardware.
Yep.
I figure you're going to see the next iPhone. I mean, if you've seen the concepts that people are kicking around in some of the so-called rumors, that's been a leading one. And, people like that. Especially, it's a good way of not making the phone massive and still getting more screen real estate. LG really isn't doing it for that reason. They just figure, got a big phone, give it even a bigger screen. But I think it can be a really smart play. And just one other brief thing about LG, sometimes I think they overreach. The LG Flex, we just reviewed that on Mashable. It didn't do so well. Yeah, the thing can bend, but the screen had some issues.
That's interesting. Everybody should go check that out. That sounds like an interesting review, and that's an interesting trend and product as well. But again, it's not the kind of, people aren't flocking to those types of things. They're not necessarily flocking to the phablets. I don't know what the answer is for LG.
Yeah. But yeah, manufacturers feel the need to differentiate in some way, be it software, hardware, whatever. So, but they come off very gimmicky.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every once in a while, though, one of those things happens and people really buy into it, and suddenly that's the new trend.
That's right. Well, Apple plans to announce a new Apple TV set-top box in April and ship it in time for the Christmas holiday season, according to Bloomberg. The company is also negotiating with Time Warner Cable, remember them from earlier in the show, and other potential partners for content. Lance, you buying this report? Do you think this is really going to happen this year?
Every time we think that Apple's going to do something with Apple TV, do some sort of update, we are wrong. I don't think anybody thinks it's a hobby anymore. I think Apple's pretty much stopped saying that. They've touted some numbers, some fairly big numbers on it. It sits at a point of conflict with their plans for an Apple television. I really do that I think the reason that we haven't seen that television is partly because Apple wasn't sure which way to go. Now, this rumor might point to the idea that Apple TV could be the horse to ride, and they do an update and they start to turn it into this more powerful box that brings everything through, including cable-based television. But it's a big if. Honestly, it's a big if. I'm actually a fan of Apple TV. I always look forward to any update they have on it because it's one of the most easy to use and effective set-top boxes out there. You plug it in, it works, and you enjoy it. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it's not expensive to get it into your house. So I'm I think they'll do some design refresh, something, who knows what. Maybe it'll be a screen. Maybe it'll be, I think somebody said something about, how it might have more of a tablet look to it, or maybe some sort of interface. So I think that we will see something new this year.
Well, I certainly hope so. And I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you say something? I heard somebody said something. Maybe it was just my earpiece exploding in my ear there. Well, Lance, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Comcast Time Warner deal that Apple is in the mix there, because they were getting ready to, apparently they were talking to Time Warner Cable, and specifically what the issue is with Apple and these cable companies is that Apple wants to use the Apple ID instead of the credentials for, say, Comcast or DirecTV. Comcast and DirecTV have been the two providers who have said, no way, there's no way we're going to let you use, if we make a deal in the future for, for having our content on Apple TV, we're not going to let you use the Apple ID as the way to get in there. Whereas Time Warner Cable said they were playing ball on that. Now that they're about to be acquired by Comcast, barring regulatory approval, then that whole deal may go out the window. So this probably makes everything much more difficult for Apple. And Curtis B. in the chat room pointed out that maybe Apple should just buy the whole lot. After Comcast buys Time Warner Cable, maybe Apple should buy Comcast. It's an interesting idea. They certainly have the money.
I was going to say they have like 110, 115 billion dollars or something like that, so they could buy it at least twice over. This is, I don't know if Apple's the company to solve this or not, but we are reaching this kind of breaking point, because even though we're seeing sort of consolidation of cable companies, but as that's happening, consumer viewing habits have completely changed. For example, you could spend an entire weekend watching all of House of Cards through your Apple TV on Netflix, never turning on your television set, never looking at your cable channels. That's a really new paradigm that we have not seen up until now. And it means that cable companies aren't exactly sure of what to do. Tech companies are kind of trying to ride with it, but know that they can't hold them consistently. So, we do have to see changes, and something like a single sign-on from someone like Apple, or maybe some sort of new kind of home entertainment sign-on that comes from a consortium, something like that has to happen. Consumers want simplicity. That's the key. They want simplicity. So let them have what they want, make it simple. Somebody's got to figure that out.
They also want to be able to watch what they want to watch and not have any artificial constraints on preventing them from watching it, essentially. Well, that's our show today. Lance, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Great stuff, as always.
Oh, not a problem. It was a total pleasure. It was great seeing you and Jason, and, anytime.
You can find Lance at Mashable.com, of course, and at Lance Ulanoff on Twitter. Well, yeah, and by the way, his Twitter account is a torrent of news all day long, so I really enjoy following it.
Thanks.
Well, send your news tips to our email address at tnt@twit.tv or call 260-TNT-SHOW and leave a message. Also, post and upvote your favorite stories on our subreddit at technewstoday.reddit.com, and find the rest of our social pages by searching for Tech News Today on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. My name is Mike Elgin, and we'll see you tomorrow.